Well, good morning and welcome everyone to today's Trinity Forum, and it is my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce Wilbur Dodge, who you know in some of his other roles, but to let him tell us a little bit about another aspect of his life. And I just want to start real briefly about simulation. Simulation is a business for Renaissance men, and it is, as Glenn said this morning, you need to ponder anew. You need to envision a world where no one has been before. You need to be able to describe it accurately in space and time and quantitatively, and then you have to build it. And you're using mirrors and maybe smoke, but machines and mirrors and lenses and electronics, and when it's all done, not only does it have to work, it has to be correct. And if not, the astronauts don't get to the moon and they don't get back. So 7 years ago, Ed Link filed his first patent for a Link flight trainer, where he put together organ bellows and player piano parts and made a motion system to teach people to fly. And 25 years later, Will Dodge joined the Link company and started working on this exciting world of simulation, which he's going to tell us about. We have old school audio visuals today, so if you have a handout, let me know. So welcome, Wilbur.
They said I was supposed to use this thing. I'm sure everybody can hear with my voice is the way it is, as I've been. But anyway, I say, if I have to use it, I use it. I don't, it's on here somehow. Is it on? Yeah. Okay, we're done. Okay. First thing before I even begin, I want to thank everybody here for the wonderful feeling I have now of being home, thanks to you. Amen. In a way, yes, but in a way it's very different. Because before, I was always at the organ bench. So this is something very different for me, and I hope you can enjoy. The talk will be, when Susan asked me about talking to the forum, it took her a little while to get a yes out of me. But in her usual way, she finally did get a yes out of me. And I am very happy to be here to do it. And it's very much like what happened on May 25th, 1961, when the President of the United States got up and he gave the people of America a challenge. His challenge was to put a crew of living human beings on the face and the surface of the moon. To put them there, to get them there, to have them get out of whatever conveyance they used to get there, to walk on the surface of the moon, to bend over or to some way collect what was on the surface of the moon, to set up various experiments for solar wind, etc., on the surface of the moon, plant a little flag. Record all of this by setting up a virtual color television station in 1961. It had to be small. It had to go to be able to relay live pictures of their activities and of the surface, of the terrain, of the sky, of how the earth looked. It was quite a project. And somehow, cleverly, he put it so that the American people said yes. And it was a time in 1961 where we were kind of embarrassed. Because back earlier, a little country by the name of the Soviet Union really did us one big thing by putting the first satellite in space. Then in April, I think it was 1961, just before his speech, Yuri Gagarin, the Soviet astronaut, was sent into space. Not only was he the first man to be in space, but they did one better. They had him to orbit the Earth in space and bring him back safely. And it was after that, in May 5th, that we sent up poor Alan Shepard in this little tiny capsule, Mercury capsule. We shot him up. He went into space. Yes, he stayed there for a few hours, and he came right back down. So we were kind of really, really, really embarrassed by what we had done. So by giving us this challenge, it was quite a feat. And we had to ask, how on earth are we going to do this? And what we have to do is we have to go back and do a little bit of history. So we have a man called Copernicus, who was born well, let's go back to even Ptolemy. Ptolemy was a Greek scientist. He was a stargazer. He lived about 200 years before Christ. And he devised this quarter section of a wheel, and he studied the heavens by pondering, or by being able to measure how far from vertical this star was, that star was, that star was, and that star was. And the great thing he did was to record. But when he looked up, well, he saw the sky. Looked like a big movie screen up there with just stars. And he says, these stars don't move. So they're just lights up there. He says, but some things do move. And he's going to call them planets. And they go across the sky, then they go under the earth, and then they come back. And then he looked out and he saw land, and he said, yeah, earth is flat. The moon and the sun, they go around the earth, and the sky stays put. And that's the amount of knowledge man had of the universe up until the 1500s. And that was a time Copernicus was born 1473. So he was a young man. He was born in a rich family. They were merchants in Poland. And he studied, and of course being merchants and being, rich people and everything, he had a good education. He went and was sent later, after his teenage years, I think he was sent at 12, he was sent to the university in Krakow and graduated and proved very, very, very capable in mathematics, in Latin, and in the study of astrology. And so he was primed for being, a Catholic priest. And of course then, his parents and everybody being rich, they sent him to Rome. And he got involved a little bit in the church, and he says, I don't want this. So he studied, while he was in Rome, he studied a little bit of medicine, but he came back to Poland. And he studied the stars. He had a little observatory in Poland near Krakow. And he was able to deduce that this idea of a flat surface of the earth, which was unmovable, didn't play with what he saw was happening in the heavens. And he very quickly deduced that the earth was not the center of the universe, but that the sun was the center of the universe. So he got together, and through his lifetime he wrote a book. But being a very smart man, Copernicus kept his mouth kind of shut. He never published the book till he was on his deathbed, because he knew the Catholic Church was going to throw all kinds of rocks at him and probably take his life and do who knows what, like they did to Galileo later. Anyway, the book was published after his death, and it formed a way for other scientists to, with the basics now that they knew where the sun was the center, they could really start and study the earth, the moons, the planets, and the stars. So along in 1546 came a guy, I like him. Tycho Brahe, Tycho Brahe. Now Tycho was a character. His family was of nobility. His he was born in a big castle in Denmark, and Tycho was he was a kind of kid that was all full of it, had very little discipline, and he was a handful for his parents. So finally his wife's brother came and captured him and took him to the capital, to the brother's castle. And Tycho was put under the thumb of his brother, of the brother of the father of his father. And Tycho was made to study. He was made to study Latin. He was made to study mathematics. He was made to study German. And he became very, very good, especially in mathematics. And when he could, he went to the University of Copenhagen. And in Copenhagen, he finished his studies and was very much backed by the King of Denmark at that time. I believe it was Frederick, and I don't remember which Frederick, but that's all right. And anyway, he had published a few things while in school, and he was such a perfectionist that the class was given a mathematics problem to do. And he got in a big argument with one of his classmates. And who was right? Who was right? Only one way to solve it, and that was a duel. Well, unlike Hamilton and Burr, he didn't have pistols, so they used swords. And poor Taco got his nose chopped. And he always, after that, wore this brass thing on his nose. And all that did was make him feel superior to everybody. And he was, though he had the actions to go, he was a perfectionist, an absolute perfectionist. So the King of Denmark set him up with an observatory on an island, Uraniaberg, which is off the coast of Denmark. And he spent his time there studying the heavens. Copious, copious, copious notebooks full of the actual spot that the star or the planet was. Absolute accurate. He built absolutely accurate instruments of the sextant type before there was even a telescope, because that came with Galileo later. He was able to deduce the orbits of the planets within, and the position of stars within a very few minutes of arc, which is unbelievable to be done with the naked eye, but he did it. He recorded everything, but he guarded his notebooks very closely. Didn't tell anybody. He was having a good time on the island. Everybody was happy with him. Anyway, the king of Denmark changed. Old Freddie died or something happened, and he kind of got in trouble because the king that came after Frederick gave him a rough time about the island and everything. So he picked up his stuff. He had heard Kepler was in Prague, so he trotted off to Prague in about 1600. And he had met Kepler and asked Kepler to work with him and for him. And Kepler at that time was quite a scientist in his own right. Kepler was a good mathematician. He was a super mathematician. Anyway, he wanted to get his hands on these darn notebooks. But Tycho wouldn't give him the notebooks. He wouldn't let him see them. And here he was trying to plot stars and things, and he didn't have the notebooks. He wanted those notebooks. So one day, the emperor, Holy Roman Emperor, of the Habsburg family in Prague, had a big formal event. The king was there and everything. And Tycho was invited to this big dinner. And Tycho, had drank too much wine during that dinner. And during the speech by the emperor, Tycho had to go to the bathroom. Well, he looked, he says, I can't go to the bathroom while that guy is speaking because he'll have my head. So he sat there, he sat there, he sat there. And finally he keeled over. Tycho died from an exploded bladder.
Oh my gosh. I never heard of that.
And that was the best news Kepler ever had. So Kepler scurried back. First thing he did was grab those notebooks. He says, aha, I think I can make some sense. He worked 30 years on those notebooks. And he came up with the three laws of planetary motion, which we still use today. And we find his first law is that all planets move in an ellipse. Now, ellipse can be drawn with a string, a little string. It has two foci, foci 1, foci 2, and if you put a pencil here and come around, you draw an ellipse. So the first law was all planets move in the form of an ellipse. And an ellipse is a figure where this major axis, this axis and this axis always to the point on the edge. You add them up and they always come to the same number. They always, A plus B equals a constant, always. So mathematically, that's rock solid. The next thing he did, the next law he came up with was a called the law of equal areas. And that law says if, oh, I'm sorry, a planet is coming and you take it here and you time it to here and you draw it to this axis and you draw it to this axis. And when it comes around here, you time that same planet and you find, you time it from when it gets here to when it gets here. And this area always equals that area. So the second law of Kepler was the law of equal areas. Now this allows us to know a lot about how anything orbiting the sun works and how we can pinpoint. The third law is what they call the law of harmonies, and it's how a number of planets intermingle and interwork, and I won't go into that today. But on these two simple laws, which Newton studied in the 1600s, he came to the conclusion that all the planets, everything in the heavens, works under the law of conic sections. Every orbit of anything in space can either be described by a cone or by, if you cut a cone this way, you get something like this. And somewhere I got, oh, here's where I did it. And this, you see, is an ellipse. You cut the cone further, and it is a parabola. You cut the cone further, and I dropped the thing. I don't know where it is.
I'll get it.
Anyway, it's a hyperbola. So on these sections,
Here's your hyperbola.
thank you, a hyperbola. And on these sections, the whole blooming thing fits. Man can understand. It is so simple. All he's got to do the math. And like the thing on the sign in the next block where the minister gave the talk this morning, the name of his talk was "The Math is Not Simple." Well, some of this math is not simple too. And, but it can describe everything. And when people say to me, you know, the Big Bang, it just happened. Everything just happened. I can't believe it. I have to believe in a creator. I'm sorry. So there's a sermon today, too. Anyway, Newton put the whole blooming thing together, and he came up with his laws of gravitation. And I don't know if this thing is working or if I even need it. Anyway, he put the whole thing together. Newton came up with the laws of gravitation, where he describes everything. Galileo, by the way, came in, where's Galileo? Galileo was born 1564, so he was about the same time as Tycho. But Galileo did a very great thing. He believed in the laws of Copernicus for a sun-centered universe. But he also invented the telescope, which really gave mankind a bigger view of the universe and more accurate sextants could be made. But anyway, Newton took Galileo also came up with the law of everything, falling bodies fall. The time, in other words, I can drop a heavy thing, I can drop a light thing, and the time it takes to come down is equal. So he came up with and the time is proportional to the square of the distance moved. This is his first law. Well, Newton took this along with his other laws, came up with the gravitational laws, F equals ma, the force on a body is mass times acceleration, and gravity is expressed in acceleration. So with this, we have all the laws that we needed to go to the moon by the 1700s. And the only problem is, man could only go as fast as a horse. And using Newton's law, we knew he had to go about 25,000 miles an hour to get off the Earth, so forget that. He also knew that still, even with the telescope, we didn't have accurate instruments enough to put a man in orbit or do anything in doing these things. So that's why the talk is accuracy and speed. So we come up using the same laws of Newton to our times. And so when Kennedy said about going to the moon, he had a group of scientists together to look at it, and they said, oh my God. Literally. And we need speed, and we need accurate measurements, exceedingly accurate measurements of time. Well, we've done a little better in speed because the steam engine was made about the 1830s. And the first one ran faster than a horse, ran about 24 miles an hour. But by the 1930s, we really came forward. And passenger steam engines, believe it or not, that were made after 1935, were built to run 135 miles an hour. The problem was, no tracks would take a steam engine running 135 miles an hour. In fact, the turn of the century, the 20th Century Limited, hit a top speed of 100 miles an hour over the Mohawk River where the tracks bordered the river, and it was nice and flat and everything. So we were tied until jet flight came along, and finally rocket flight in 1946, we broke the speed of sound, which is around 700 miles an hour. Nowhere near 25,000 miles an hour, which it was neat. Well, anyway, we had the project of the Mercury. When after Sputnik was set up, we got on the ball and we started sending rockets up. We started doing rockets, and we found that way by John Glenn's time and Gagarin's time, we could attain 25,000 miles an hour by the big Saturn rocket. I can remember a copy of the Saturn rocket sitting outside Washington Street in front of the Forum where the old armory used to be, in that parking lot thing. And I was working in the building next door, and the tank was higher than the building. A very impressive one. Anyway, we started to get the rockets necessary. And with the Project Mercury, we started to get somewhere. But my gosh, putting a person on the moon, we hadn't even orbited the Earth yet when this proclamation was made. But we had a pretty good idea with the Project Mercury. So number one, we had a way to get there. We had the capsule, the design of the capsule really, all we had to do was make it bigger, instrumented it a lot more, but the big hanger was the LEM, the lunar module. What the heck are we going to do? What kind of a thing? Well, Grumman came to Kennedy, to the scientists that Kennedy pictured, and they said, we envisioned it like this. And they had a square box, a small square box, maybe 2 inches and 4 inches on the side. On the square box, they put a donut, and they put some toothpicks, 4-leg toothpicks out. And that was their idea of a lunar module. It clicked, and it worked. And so you find, if you really look and use your imagination, and you see the lunar module, you can think of the donut, the box, and the 4 spindly legs. It worked. So now Grumman was given the project of the lunar module. I forgot the company that got the CMS, the
North
command
American.
module. Anyway, and now we need some way to train people. Well, we'd done a little training in the Mercury project, but nothing. In this time, this was 1966 that we got, or 64, we got involved in it a little bit, in training. Those days, the computers, their memory was in kilobits. Now we have gigabytes, a bit and a byte. Well, a byte now is at least 64 bits long. Even the first byte was only 4 bits long. This was in the 60s. So that the computing power of this thing was limited by the memory. And it was hellacious. This, in your handout, is a picture of just the lunar module. And basically, a lot of this is a computer made by Computer Controls Corporation in the 1960s. And it was boosting something like a working memory of something like 1,000 bytes, 1,000 kilobytes. And it was huge. I mean, you talk many, many, many cabinets. I have more than that in my cell phone. I have gigabytes in this. I have about 10 gigabytes in this. Unbelievable. Well, anyway, comes the time of simulation. We're going fast. I gotta go fast. First trip I took to Houston was in the 1960s, I believe 1965, I think was the first time I was there, 64 or 65, because I contracted with them in 64. And I walked into the computer room that was supposed to house the LEM. Oh my God. The thing was as big as a football field. It was huge. It was about 30 feet high. It had to be at least 100 foot wide. It had to be about 300 foot long. It had to be air conditioned. The air conditioning room in Building 5 in Houston, which was the simulator building, was almost as big as was almost half of, you had half for air conditioning and half for the simulators.
That would be nice for today.
It would be nice for today, but it was not good for back when I first went there, because we were working with it and trying to plan out how we were going to maintain equipment, where we were going to put it, et cetera, et cetera. So they had the temperature at about 55, and it was July. And I was working in this room, it was cold. And so break for lunch, okay, we go out for lunch. I opened the front door, I walked out to the stoop of the thing, and the next thing I knew, they were carrying me back in the building. I completely blacked out with the bloomin' heat in Houston. If you've ever been in Houston, it must have been 110. Anyway, what I want to do is say that this simulator, you're not only talking about computing power, you're talking about how the heck do I get cold air through all of this stuff. Remember, those days are in the days of, the computers were pretty much transistorized, but they were real bulky. Computer cards were about that big by yay big, and there was literally tens of thousands of them. And in the LEM itself, how the heck are we going to get cold air to these things? And this ended up to be one of the major problems that we handed off to someone else, and I don't remember who we did. Anyway, we did, I've got to get going, I guess, a little faster. We did get the training mission simulator. As I say, the Apollo command module was pretty easy for us. I was never involved very much in that. I came to Link, I was involved with maintainability of these instruments. How do you maintain them? The program to maintain them. How do you maintain records of parts that you put in them? How do you maintain what parts are really lasting? It was part of the reliability group. Their part was to figure out how long each part would be together and then formulate how long the simulator would work without replacing a part, and et cetera, et cetera. My job was to figure out how on earth are we going to maintain this thing. And one of the big projects I remember was to show you just one little thing. And we have over there, we have what in the tech center right now, part of the telescope that went with the LEM. In your handout you can see the telescope went up on top of it. You can see it just about in the middle of the paper, right on here. It sits on top. It's a huge thing. It's about what? Sits about to the top to the bottom about what? 5 feet, Susan?
It's above my head, so
Yeah, okay. And it's, what did we figure? 4 feet wide by
6 by 6.
6 by 6, okay, 6 by 6. So just the telescope was a huge thing. And we had a project where we had to look through the telescope, but then when there has something between Earth and the moon, when the Earth came up, you saw the curvature of the Earth. And, wait a minute, it's how the moon and the sun worked. Anyway, you saw the curvature, and we had to come up to be able to show that. We had a star ball, which showed all the heavens. That was worked by servo systems, very accurately positioning it. This was in the center of the whole thing. But part of the thing we had because of culting, because when you went behind the moon, that was when you saw the surface of the Earth kind of disappeared this way, and we had to make an occulter to show that shadow coming up in this telescope thing. Well, somebody came, I don't know whether it was Dick Mecklenburg or who it was. I'll say it's Dick Mecklenburg because he came up with a lot of crazy ideas. Anyway, he had this big reel of tape. He was looking at a tape recorder and he says, "Ha-ha, as this tape recorder winds the tape, that circle gets bigger and bigger. So I'm just going to make a big tape machine inside this occulter." And it worked really well. As the size of how big the circle is, you just wound more tape on. And then you had the whole thing working in an XY plane run by what we call servo system, very accurate little motors and gearboxes that ran the thing up and down, accurate to probably two tenths of an inch. And very, very accurate moving of this occulter. And we built it, and it worked good. We took it to Houston, and it didn't work good. And I went down to Houston, I looked at the thing, and I says, "My God, I know why." I got up in it, and almost a couple inches from it are these compact arc lamps running about 1,000 watts. So this whole thing was heating up like an oven up there, even with all the cold air and everything from the room. And the lubricant in these little tiny motors, the bearings, the lubricant was evaporating and the motors were hanging up. This is just one little problem that we had in the simulation. And I took the grease, went down to Kierfat and I got a sample of DuPont's grease that we were using. And I figured out what happened when I heated the thing up. And I found out it got sticky. You heated it up, and then you tried to run it, and it got sticky. It boiled whatever the thing that made it liquid boiled away, and then it was gone. So they got us in touch with DuPont, and very interesting in this time, about 66. Very exciting for me. I was able to work with the guys. It was very early in the days of Teflon, and trying to get Teflon in where trying to grind it, which is an amazing thing anyway. And I don't know how the heck they did it. This is all their process, which they guarded. Anyway, they made us a grease which contained very, very microscopic flakes of Teflon and did not require any liquid carrier. It was literally kind of sprayed on the shaft. Very, very diligently put together, and the darn thing works. It was Teflon that saved the day. It was Teflon that saved the day for the instruments of the LEM on the moon, because they used the same idea. These were in the days when instruments were dials, also worked by little tiny motors. Also on the moon would have had the same problems, because you're going from a minus 200 degrees centigrade to a plus 200 centigrade when you come out into the sun. That's what you're dealing with on the moon. Anyway, I feel pretty good because I was in on the working out of the Teflon lubricant. This program, the Lenman Apollo, I figure the height of my career and the height of my life. It was just super. But it was this crazy kind. When we tried it, it worked. When they tried it in the actual instruments, it made them work much better. And they said, yes, we would have had problems on the moon. We do not have problems on the moon now. Just one, but there were thousands and thousands of little problems that came up that we found in this flight simulator that would have killed the project if they had sent the thing up in the real moon. And it was really a time. It was a time when we all pulled together. I don't know any of us that wasn't working 12-hour days. It cost many people their marriage because of the pressure that was put on us. But it wasn't pressure. We wanted it. We were excited about it. We were so wrapped up in it, nothing else existed. And the camaraderie that was built up, and it's great to see the guys. It's great to see Mecklenburg now down at the Tech Center, to see Gene Abbey and the rest of the guys down there. We were a team at this time, and we were very close together. Anyway, we pulled it off, and we did make a simulator. The simulator made possible the landing on the moon, which I will never forget because it was the 29th anniversary of my stepmother and father's wedding. That was July 20th, 1969, a day I'll never, never, never forget. We had pulled it off, and we landed on the moon. Not only that, they got in the blooming thing. They were able to lift off. They were able to perform all the things that they were supposed to do. Their spacesuits worked. In spite of the hellacious temperature, you'd go behind in the shadow and it'd get cold. You'd go out in the sun and it would get beastly hot. So the spacesuits themselves were a major, major problem. Anyway, we did get to the moon, and we did get back. Escape velocity, by the way, from the moon even, is 24,200 miles an hour. And they had just enough fuel. They had to use the same rockets that they used coming down, they had to use to get off. So that's why he had such a bad time, came very, very close to using too much fuel coming down, which if they had done that, they'd have never come back to Earth. So that was a very, very, very scary time for all of us. I was up here in Binghamton at that time. Anyway, I was spending 2 weeks in Binghamton, a week in Houston, and a week at the Cape. 2 weeks in Binghamton, a week in Houston, and a week at the Cape. I did that between about 1977 and about 1971, when we hit Apollo 13, which is another disaster, which I will never forget. The simulator saved the day with Apollo 13 in helping them set their guidance roughly by coming up with a shadow of a piece in the cockpit of the LEM going over and hitting a portion on the wall, making a shadow. And they found that when everything was in that, the LEM was in this position accurately, because it came from a small aperture that the sun shone through. Oh, and made the spot on the wall. That's what it was, as I remember now. Anyway, and they were able to roughly line up the platforms, and once they got them lined up roughly, then they could use the telescope and line everything up accurately and know what their position was. But because they had lost power in the Apollos, they had a very rough time. They had when it happened, they were on their way to the moon, and they lost power. Therefore, they lost the platform power. The gyros were not powered up, so they were not accurate. They were in tough shape. And of course the LEM was shut down. So bringing up the LEM, which had power and everything, they could bring up the platform if they could align it. And in aligning it, what we had to do in Houston was to find something. And they found out if they put a little hole in the window and the sun shined through, it would make a little spot on the wall. And it was inaccurate from big point, but at least it allowed them to get the platforms aligned to where now they could use the telescope and align it with the stars so that they knew where they were and they would guide themselves on the way back. So another place, simulator saved the day of Apollo 13. Absolutely. I'll never forget it. Anyway, Kennedy really did something when he asked us to go to the moon. He really did something. And I wonder, as I was putting this talk, I saw in the paper today, we have a major problem in this country, a problem with opiates, heroin, a problem with a major problem. And I was thinking, what if the President of the United States stood up and said, I give you a challenge to eliminate the problem of opiates by the end of this decade, by 2020. Could we do it? And I think we could if we used the same thing. If we got people together and we divided the problem. What is the problem? How would we divide it? First thing we have to do is we have to cut off the supply. How do you cut off the supply? I don't know. They'll figure a way. First thing they got to figure, what is the supply? It's grown. Where is it grown? A lot of it's grown in Pakistan, a lot of it's grown in South America. What if the whole situation, we all have, Europe has problem with drugs, we have problem with drugs, South America's major problem with drugs. What if we got together and said, we will buy out these farmers and we will destroy the opiate supply and control it, or not destroy it, but to control it, and to permit only a medical use amount to be made. Utterly, absolutely working together. Our major problem in this thing is we don't work together. A major success of LEM and Apollo and the moon was that we were all working together. Even the Soviet Union wanted to do it once we got started. And later on, we had a time when we worked together with the Soviet astronauts. We had them in Houston, I met them. And we worked together to do this. And we talk about the war on drugs.
Excuse me, I think we have a new candidate for presidency. Let's do it.
I
and we
did Bill
have,
Dodge.
and we have Ali. He wanted violence, really. He spoke violence.
Who's that?
And we have another person in Martin Luther King who spoke nonviolence. I don't believe a war on drugs is ever going to do anything, because war never solved anything. Violence only makes violence. But nonviolence, look at how far we've gone in our civil rights. And I think we could do it with drugs again in a nonviolent way. And it's your generation now. It is the younger generation, let's put it this way. As I look around, I'm going to say, hey, your generation is my generation. It is the younger people that has,
Well,
and if they work together, it can be done. And that's the way I want to end this. Yeah.
can you tell us what Neil Armstrong said when he got on the moon?
One small step for man. One, I believe it was giant step for mankind. Neil Armstrong was a great guy, by the way, and I have to do the offshoot. One time I was sitting with my buddy, Dave Mayo, who was a quality assurance guy at the Cape. We were sitting in a bar, and we looked up, and holy cow, there was Neil Armstrong and a buddy playing pool. So Dave said, "Come on, Will." He says, "I'll clue you the colors of the balls and show you." So okay, so Neil thought this was fun. The blind guy and the other guy tried to play pool. And yes, I played pool with Neil Armstrong. Was a great. The guys were great. Buzz was a little funny. Buzz Aldrin was great. But Neil was a real regular guy. And of course, he and Dave were both Navy pilots, so they got along well, and that put me in good hands, because I always trailed along with David. And we had a lot of fun.
Well, I think on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you for such a wonderful presentation. But I have two things that I have to say. One is that the Soviets were the first to make an exploration. I remember in 1957,
Right.
my first daughter was born, Adrian. She was born in February. And then the next thing I remember that it was, the next thing was the Soviets sent that dog up
Oh,
into
yeah.
space. Sputnik.
First living animal in space.
Sputnik.
The Sputnik
And
3
then-
or
and then
4
the
was it?
third thing was Appalachian. So
Yeah.
the Soviets were the first ones who made an exploration into space.
Yep.
And then the second thing I wanted to say is that, like alcoholism and prohibition, we put alcohol out of business legally, but we have not cured alcoholism.
Right.
And so I don't think that by cutting off the source of opiates is going to change. I changed the narcotics problem. I think we have to change human nature. Now, how do we do that? That is the great problem. Because
for you.
as long as people want drugs, they will find a way to get it. And you have to cure them of this wanting to get drugs. Have we cured people who really are alcoholics of the wanting to have alcohol? No. We have to change human nature. And how do we do that? Well, no. Do you know? That's our challenge. That's our challenge.
We have a new candidate for president.